Mrs. Ina Harvey, and also she is the management coordinator for the Caribbean region. I'm sure that Ina is no stranger to many of you, as the IICA continues to work with us in the development of many areas of agriculture. Next to her is Mr. Hanikva. I hope I've pronounced his name correctly. He is the head of the infrastructure and rehabilitation from the delegation of the European Union to Barbados. As you know, the EU is one of the active development partners to many of us in the region. Sitting next to him is Mr. Esworth Reed. He is the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture, Food, Fisheries, and Water Resource Management in Barbados. And sitting to his right is Mr. Milton Haughton, who is the executive director of the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, one of the supporters of this important work. And last but not least at the head table is Mr. Stephen Willoughby, who is the Chief Fisheries Officer. Welcome to all. I also recognize the presence of the consultants from the legislative and SPS guidelines. Mr. Kelly, who many of you would have met during this period of consultations, Dr. George Grant, as well as Helga Gunlaw Doughty. I hope I pronounced her name correctly too. She was the person responsible for the environmental and residue monitoring program. Also present are many of my local and regional colleagues. For example, we have Mrs. Joyce Leslie, who is the Deputy Chief Fisheries Officer, Dr. Patrick McConney, who is the Senior Lecturer in Surmees, UWI, which I have not seen in a very long time, although we both live in Barbados. We also have Mr. Simeon Collins, who is the CEO of CAFSA. As you know, that CAFSA is the Caribbean Agriculture, Health and Food Safety Agency, which was established by the CARICOM to be able to harmonize some of these SPS measures across the region. And CAFSA is now being operationalized, and we will welcome 3 members of staff in September and October. So we are on our way, and therefore then they will be bombarding you as our programs proceed. We also have Dr. Mark Troutman, who's the Senior Veterinary Officer in Barbados, and his counterparts from St. Lucia, Mrs. Dr. King Sinak, and his colleague from St. Kitts and Nevis, Mrs. Tracy Challenger, Dr. Tracy Challenger. We also have someone I have not seen for a very long time, Peter Murray. We also have Ms. Delilah Cab from Belize, and we also have the Director of Surinese Fisheries Unit, Juliette. Miss Juliette, I can't remember her name. We met while I was in Suriname some years ago. Welcome to Barbados. And we have other persons. As you can see, a wide variety of persons here. The work of the consultants addresses many areas of concern to us with respect to the safety and quality of our fish and fisheries product, and our ability to share these products among ourselves and with those further afield. We have interacted with them during the period of their consultation, and now it is time to hear how they have packaged all that has been said and the recommendations that they will make. As you have noted by now, we have a diverse group here, and I'm sure that the deliberations will be fruitful. However, before we get into that aspect of the program, I would like to invite various persons to speak who would have provided us with some background to the meeting, some of the expectations, etc. And I first want to invite Mrs. Ina Harvey, who, as I said earlier, is the country rep to Barbados and the management coordinator, and who has worked many years in these SPS and food safety issues. So, Mrs. Harvey, your remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wood. Good morning. Buenos dias a todos. Special welcome to our Spanish-speaking countries. Goedemorgen. To our Surinamese. Bonjour to our French Caribbean folks. And it's a real pleasure for me as the IICA representative to make some brief remarks this morning. Mr. Esworth Reed, PS, Ministry of Agriculture, Food, Fisheries, and Water Resource Management. Mr. Yannick Vaux, Head of Infrastructure and Rehabilitation of the EU Delegation. Mr. Milton Haughton, Executive Director of the CRFM Secretariat, heads of our regional agencies from CAFSA, CrossQ, SERMIS, CARICOM Secretariat, and others. Dr. Wood, Project Coordinator of the National Agricultural Health and Food Control Agency, Chairman of the Board of CAFSA, many hats, Chair of our National TNINT, our National Implementing Committee for the EU SPS project. Mr. Stephen Willoughby, Chief Fisheries Officer, Fisheries Division, Ministry of Agriculture. Other senior members of the Ministry of Agriculture. Members of BANUFO and the private sector. Members of our TNINT. Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Janet Lawrence, our project manager of the EU SPS project here at IICA Barbados. Consultants, Mr. Headley, Dr. Grant. Colleagues, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. As the executing agency for the 10th European Development Fund program entitled Support to the Caribbean Forum of ACP States in the implementation of commitments undertaken under the Economic Partnership Agreement, the EPA, IICA is pleased to welcome you to this regional validation workshop on the fisheries component. As you're aware, the overall objective of this SPS project is to strengthen the capacity of our CARIFORUM states for international market access through compliance with Europe's sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as improve capacity for developing regionally harmonized SPS measures. The SPS project actions are directed towards creating and/or strengthening regional and national SPS systems through systematic focus on alleviating constraints in three main areas, namely legislation, coordination, and capacity building. Whoops. The specific objectives of the fisheries subcomponent are to determine the status of the existing fisheries legislation, protocols, regulations, and guidelines through national consultations. And most of you, all of you, I have no doubt, will have participated in these national consultations to determine the level of coordination of the fisheries subsector at national and regional levels, to determine the status of national and regional and environmental monitoring demands and existing programs, and to develop proposals for establishing environmental monitoring programs at the equivalent international best practices, principles, and standards. Partnerships are key to successful implementation of this project. And in this context, I would like to really acknowledge and thank Milton Haughton and his team at the CRFM. Your role and your actions are critical to achieving the expected outcomes of this fisheries component. I also take the opportunity to thank the CARICOM Secretariat and the SPS Committee of the Dominican Republic, Comité Nacional para la Aplicación de Medidas Sanitarias y Fitosanitarias, for their collaboration on their project. Since starting their work in April, the two consultants, Jamaican SPS expert Dr. George Grant and international legal consultant Chris Headley of the UK, have been working hard examining legislation, standards, protocols, benchmarks, governing safety in the seafood industry, and they've held national consultations with stakeholder groups across the region. Over the next 2 days, they will present a set of technical proposals which provide tools for us to move forward. The inputs and feedback from stakeholders at the national level have been critical in the development of these proposals. And today, the process continues with this regional validation workshop. Our ability as a region to cash in on the potentially lucrative international export trade in fish and seafood and to overcome the huge gaps in SPS legislation will depend on the checks, controls, and monitoring systems implemented by the stakeholders, both at the public sector level and the private sector level. And it's not only about export to EU markets. For many of our countries, we are still going to be a long way from meeting not only the SPS compliance requirements, but also the quality and preferences of the EU markets. Here in the region, we need to provide wholesome products, first and foremost for our populations, as well as for the millions of long-stay and cruise visitors, for whom the tourism experience includes a cuisine featuring seafood, and who represent an untapped export market for us. We also need to take into consideration that a high percentage of the seafood products that we consume is imported as frozen, chilled, and salted fish, and that SPS compliance focuses heavily on the issue of traceability. Only last month, IICA, together with the USDA, held a similar national stakeholder workshop on compliance with FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and its regulations. All of these developments, whether they be based on EU or US requirements, provide a wake-up call for us in the region to put our own house in order. As we deliberate over these 2 days in this workshop, let us not only validate the consultant's findings, but at a deeper level, let us validate our Caribbean reality and our potential and commitment to guarantee safe and reliable supplies of food from the sea for our own people, first and foremost. Food that we can then feel confident to share with our visitors and with consumers in export markets. I wish us all a very productive session as we continue on this exciting journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Harvey. I now invite Mr. Yannick Vaux, who is the head of infrastructure and rehabilitation. He said he's also now taken on the portfolio of agriculture, and he is from the delegation of the European Union in Barbados. For your remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Good morning, everyone. I'm from a rather informal country somewhere in the north of Europe, so I will just stick to all protocols being duly observed and proceed from there. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting the EU this morning. We're always very pleased to join in the opening ceremonies of our programs and to try and follow them as much as we can. And I hope that one of my colleagues will come along either during today or during tomorrow to see how things go. As was mentioned in the invitation, this project is one of a number of components funded by the EU aimed at supporting the development of Caribbean agriculture and fisheries. The project, which forms the umbrella for these projects, is the very shortly named EU Support to CARIFORM States in the implementation of commitments undertaken under the Economic Partnership Agreement, or the EPA. Funds for this project come from an overall allocation to the region for the period 2007 to 2013. I.e. an envelope which is about to finish, and this project is somewhere in a medium stage of implementation, I understand, and ready to go to the next level. The EU is close to concluding programming of our national and regional programs for the next financing envelope, which will run from 2014 to 2020. This is known in our sort of development circles as the 11th European Development Fund. The amount allocated by the EU to the Caribbean or CARIFORM region for this period is €1 billion. This is the largest amount ever committed by the EU to the region, and by far the largest grant support program available to the region. I'd like very briefly to dwell on the Economic Partnership Agreement, or the EPA, which, as those of you who follow the regional media probably are aware, has been the subject of some opinions recently. In response to these opinions, the EU Commissioner for Trade, Cecilia Malmström, and my own boss here in Barbados, Ambassador Barfoot, have highlighted some facts and put them on the table. They noted that the EPA, which is one agreement in a system of many agreements that the EU has concluded across the world, is a unique trade and development agreement. The EPAs themselves do not contain references to financial support for implementation, but as we see here today, and as I've just mentioned now, the EU has prepared a considerable program of support to ensure implementation, or to move implementation along. Through the EPA, the EU has given tariff-free access for all CARIFORM goods to the market already, and whilst at the same time maintaining and respecting CARIFORM's need to protect domestic markets through safeguard mechanisms, transitional arrangements, and protection of vital sectors. The EPA is also a much better prospect than alternatives that were on the table. we see the EPA as a catalyst for further vital regional integration, which of course requires will, implementation of agreements, legislation, projects, and programs. Last but not least, EU support to measures such as SPS do not only support CARFORM exports to EU markets, but to all markets with whom you trade, who also have SPS requirements to their imports. I understand that the workshop which commences today marks an important milestone in establishing a regional legislation and improved governance systems, as well as ensuring environmental safeguards. I therefore, on behalf of the head of the EU delegation, Ambassador Barfoot, commend all actors who have taken the process to this stage. And just listening to the representative of the IICA just now, it sounds like that was a very participatory process, which is something that we very much commend and endorse and promote at the level of the EU. And the fact that you have undergone this, what may seem as a rather tedious process, I think is testament to the democratic values that underpin the principles of CARFORM and EU states, and which is one of the strongest bonds in our partnership. So it may have been a long process, but we believe, and indeed you also believe, that having such processes make the work we do stronger and more likely of being implemented and respected by all those who are supposed to implement it along the way. So kudos to you for going through that process. The EU wishes you success in your deliberations today and in the following days, and we hope for a sustained and even enhanced impetus in the implementation of this vital component and project. Thank you very much.
Our next presenter to make some remarks is the Executive Director from the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, Mr. Milton Haughton. Mr. Haughton.
Madam Chairperson, Ms. Dr. Beverley Wood, Mr. Reid, Permanent Secretary, Ms. Ina Harvey from IICA, Mr. Yannick Var from the Delegation of the European Union, Mr. Stephen Willoughby, Chief Fisheries Officer, Mr. Rommel St. Hill from CARICOM Secretariat, Dr. Janet Lawrence, Project Manager for the SPS project, Mr. Derek Omar from CrossQ, Dr. Collins from CAFSA, Dr. McConney from Surmees, representative from the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organization, CNFO, Vernal Nichols and Gladstone White, Julius Gittins and representatives from the media, Patrick McConney from Surmees, UWI, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And I extend a very warm welcome to all of you who are here today. We also have our consultants who have been introduced already from the UK and from Iceland. We have representatives from all the CARIFORUM countries, with the exception of the Bahamas and Haiti, who unfortunately could not join us today. We have representatives from the private sector, people who are involved in harvesting, processing, and marketing of fish and aquaculture products. We have representatives from various government agencies, those responsible for fisheries, those responsible for legal affairs, public health, and the competent authorities for fisheries SPS matters. And we have representatives from various regional institutions that are associated with SPS and the safety of fish and seafood. Madam Chair, I want to take this opportunity to thank the government of Barbados for so graciously hosting this meeting and assisting us with the logistical arrangements. I would also like to recognize and thank the EU for their significant contribution, for their support, and indeed their commitment to the sustainable development and management of fisheries and aquaculture in the CARIFORUM region. The EU has been an important development partner, providing much-needed financial and technical assistance for the region's fisheries sector. Although fish and seafood have long been traded internationally, trade has increased dramatically in recent decades, such that fish and fishery products now constitute the most highly traded food commodity internationally. The value of the regional fish trade increased from $15.5 billion US dollars in 1980 to 130 billion in 2012, and this is according to FAO, their most recent report on state of the world fisheries and aquaculture. This means that 37% of global fish production is traded. Soya bean, with an estimated value of 58 billion, is the second most traded food commodity in the world, but you can see it's far behind fisheries in terms of its volume and economic importance. No less than 195 countries export part of their production, and some 180 countries import fishery product. The level of trade has been growing at an accelerating pace in recent years in response to increased demand and rising production, particularly from aquaculture. Developing countries have particularly benefited from this boom. By some estimates, 77% of fish consumed worldwide as food is supplied by developing countries. Export of fish is of enormous economic importance to several developing countries, including CARIFORUM states. Caribbean ACP states are mainly middle-income, small island developing states that are highly dependent on international trade for economic growth, particularly the inflows of foreign exchange from export of natural resources and the provision of services. The export of fish and fishery products has always been an important source of foreign exchange for our countries. Current levels of exports are in the range of 75 to 80,000 metric tons, valued at between 315 and 350 million United States dollars each year. The global erosion of tariff preference provided to our countries over their competitors in traditional markets such as the EU through the trade liberalization process that is underway is making fish and fishery product from the region less competitive in such markets. For example, our countries are beneficiary of preferential access to the EU market under the Cotonou Agreement and the generalized system of preference. But the trend in the erosion of preference is likely to accelerate as countries and trading blocs continue to liberalize trade and to eliminate these preferential arrangements. The fishery-specific rules of origin applied under various trade agreements and the increasingly complex sanitary and phytosanitary systems, labeling and quality standards that are applied, sustainability requirements are making it increasingly difficult for our countries to compete internationally. You have heard about the EPA already. This trade agreement was signed in October of 2008. It is comprehensive, covering, among other things, trade in goods, services and investment, competition policy, innovation and intellectual property, transparency in public procurement, environment, etc. There's also an overarching development chapter which addresses capacity, promotion of private sector development, diversification of export base, and building infrastructure necessary to conduct trade. The EPA also addresses subject-specific development cooperation, including agriculture and fisheries. And we find that Chapter 5 in Part 2, Articles 37 to 42, They deal with agriculture and fisheries. And the parties agree that the fundamental objective of this agreement with respect to agriculture and fisheries is sustainable development and the eradication of poverty in CARIFORUM states, and the smooth and gradual integration of these economies into the global economy. The parties acknowledge the economic and social importance of activities relating to fisheries and the utilization of the living marine resources of CARIFORUM states, and the need to maximize those benefits in relation to such factors as food security, employment, poverty alleviation, foreign exchange earnings, and social stability of fishing communities. And the parties to the EPA recognize that the fisheries and marine ecosystems of the CARIFORUM countries are complex, biologically diverse, and fragile, and that exploitation should take into account those factors through effective conservation and management of fishery resources and related ecosystems based on sound scientific advice and the precautionary principle. But implementation of the EPA is critical to take advantage of the significant economic opportunities available through this important trade agreement. But this has been a major challenge for all our countries. Several CARIFORUM countries have still not been able to fully surmount the challenges posed by the comprehensive and complex SPS requirements of the EU regulations, and are thus effectively barred from exporting to the EU markets. Others are able to trade a rather limited range of fish and fishery products. The primary reason for this situation is really the extensive and complex legal and regulatory frameworks, human and institutional capacity, and laboratory infrastructure that countries must put in place to satisfy the EU requirements. So a very important challenge for us in the region at this time is how to optimize economic and social value of our fisheries and aquaculture production. And a key impediment in is meeting the international standards for SPS and food safety. You have already heard about the 10th EDA-funded project entitled Support to the Caribbean Forum of ACP States in the Implementation of the Commitments Undertaken under the Economic Partnership Agreement, the Sps Measures Project. The objective of the fisheries component of this project are to increase production and trade in fish and seafood that meet international standards, establish sound and comprehensive national and regional legal and regulatory framework for fish and seafood, including related environmental and residue monitoring, and develop efficient institutional mechanisms for coordination of SPS issues at both national and regional levels, including the development of information systems to underpin the coordination process. And you heard from Ms. Harvey that the project has been executed by IICA, and it has been done in collaboration with ourselves, CARICOM Secretariat, and the SPS Committee of Dominican Republic. We are responsible for the fisheries component of this project. And this is not only timely in its commitment, but it is very important for the future, for the long-term development of the fisheries and aquaculture sector in the region. This is because it will help us to create a solid foundation for our countries to improve trade capacity and hence take advantage of the opportunities to expand export of fish and seafood, not just to Europe, but to other markets, while at the same time ensure that our people have safe fish and seafood to eat. The field activities commenced in April, and the consultants, supported by CRFM staff, conducted extensive consultations with partners all across the region. So during the period April